I love this generation. They're called the snowflake generation because they're flaky, easily offended, got a sense of entitlement. But when you see like snowflakes fall together, like millions of them, in England here, they shut roads and shops. And that's what we're seeing with this generation. They're making change, not just micro change, but macro change. You get a few more million snowflakes falling at the same time, you get what's called an avalanche. And I think over this last season, we've seen Gen Z cause this avalanche, which is destructing quite a lot of things. Some things need to be destructed, some things didn't need to be destructed. But I think what is happening through Gen Z, I think God is using it.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast. Thanks for checking out the video version of the podcast here on YouTube. Of course, we've got the audio version as well if you want to check that out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. But we really hope that these conversations week after week inspire you, connect with you, maybe stir something up in you or teach you something that you haven't heard before. We've got a whole archive of podcasts right here on the YouTube channel, as well as a ton of tutorials to equip you really practically as a communicator, as a leader in the church, and as a creative. So I encourage you to check that out. Subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks so much to the sponsors, Compassion Canada and the Church Go, for making this season of the podcast possible. Dan Blythe, welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm really glad to have you today.
Thank you so much.
As just a means of introduction, I'd love to know a little, introduce yourself to people and really I'd love to start by hearing a bit of your own story. I don't actually know your story. So where are you at right now? And then let's go back to tell us a little bit about your faith journey.
Yeah, sure. I'm in southwest London right now. So about 2 miles from Wimbledon tennis, the tennis championship. Yeah. And I grew up probably about, an hour away from here. So sort of just on the outskirts of London. When I was about 9 years old, Mum and Dad got divorced, neither of them Christian at that time. But they both encountered Christ and gave their life to God. And then they both married new partners who were both Christians. And so They started going to their local church, which was amazing. And I think from age 9, I could see God was real because I could see the change that happened in their life. They became confident, they became secure. But then being new Christians, they became a little bit, let's say, legalistic, holding tight to the rules. And as a teenager growing up, that's all I heard, the thou shalt nots rather than the thou shalls. And so through my teenage years, I was aware of God, but not close to God. In fact, I didn't want to be close to him because I didn't know any other Christians and I wanted to do what all my mates were doing. And then to cut a long story short, age 18, went backpacking to Australia, almost escaping the rules and the box which I felt like I was kind of in, loving parents, but I just felt like I could not live that Christian lifestyle they wanted for me. Just by chance, the first people I meet in Australia are Christians. And that week they take me boxing, surfing, watch the Rugby World Cup, and then to a Connect group. And I just saw, after like 1 week with them, they had something I didn't. I lived for the weekend. They lived for something much greater. And when I asked them, like, why'd you live the way you live? They just said, well, it's Jesus. And I knew for me then I wanted what they had, and I made a decision to follow Christ.
Wow. It sounds like it's this story of how God is working in people when we don't see it, or he's chasing us down and orchestrating things when we couldn't have known. That's really, even in your parents, that's a really unusual story of them becoming Christians, both of them after divorce. That's amazing, actually.
It was crazy.
And so, obviously that was like this critical age for you. Like you made a decision. I think we're a pretty similar age. So I'm kind of like going back and like what was sort of the early 2000s like in the world and that time you were making those kinds of decisions. So is that where you ended up at Hillsong College, or how did that come into the story? Yeah,
it was actually at a church called C3, Christian City Church in Sydney, Australia. I didn't know any other church. So my church, I knew my mum's church, my dad's church, and then I knew no other church. And so this church experience was like nothing else, just normal, everyday people living life to the full. And then I started Bible college pretty early on. I had a friend and they're just like, why don't you do it? And I prayed about it. And in my early days, I felt God was saying to do it. But you got to understand, if you spent several of your teenage years away from God, you know, some of those habits don't disappear overnight. And so I started Bible college, and the stuff I was getting up to through Bible college wouldn't really be acceptable by Bible college terms. But again, I was just so overwhelmed by the grace that everyone showed me. They kept putting their arm around me, pointing me to, I guess, God's best for me. And over time, Bible college, the first year was like a detox for me. All my habits and stuff just started dropping off. And it was in the second year of Bible college where I really felt God saying, I want you to go into ministry. It wasn't until the second year where I even had a thought to want to do that.
Huh. Oh, that's really interesting. And I appreciate what you're saying too about, you're talking about like sanctification, really, like that it didn't all happen at once. And I think that a lot of the times when we tell our stories, it does sound like it's all cleaned up. I think for the sake of telling a story, we clean it up too much. But what you're saying is, there was like a lot of, messiness along the way as you're kind of working it out. When you were young like that, can you think of, because I'm thinking about that in my own life and the grace that was extended to me when I was stumbling along, figuring out faith. What were some of the things about the leaders that they offered to you? Like when you said like, your lifestyle didn't look like someone who's going to be a Christian leader. What were some of the markers of that in the leaders around you? Like how did they love you or care for you? Or what stood out to you about what they did with this young guy?
That's such a good question. And I'll actually name one of the guys who was very significant. His name was Josh Kelsey. He's the pastor of C3 New York, and he was the young adult pastor at the time. And he would just call me into his office and he'd say, hey, Dan, I've heard this has gone on. And I'd say, yeah, it has. Yeah, I did that. At the time, I wasn't even aware that it wasn't fully not acceptable. So I didn't get why it was a big deal. And he was like, if you keep doing that, this is the kind of effect and result it will have in your life. But this is what it looks like if you kind of, want to give that stuff to Christ and surrender that to him. And I always felt in my spirit, I didn't want to live the way I was living. I just felt like I couldn't deal with the stuff that I was dealing with. And I would love to say that the first time he confronted me, everything disappeared. I would say it was over a year of me getting called back into his office and him just saying, Dan, but I know that you want God's best for your life. And he kept praying for me, encouraging me. And he wasn't putting me on the platform. I wasn't in any leadership role. And I was kind of grateful for that because I was just in a place where I could work on my identity, find out who I was in Christ, and just work out this stuff, because I wasn't ready for any platform stuff, which was great.
Okay, well, since you're bringing that up, let me go there next for just a second. There's these stories over and over of these people who get these people. We know some of them personally, or we read about people who get a big platform and they're not ready for it. Their character and gifting are not equal. They're they're a mess, and then it turns into like a public mess. What would you say? But really, you kind of quickly into your 20s were leading in like a large church context and had some level of platform. What would you say to other kind of younger leaders listening about how to do that? Maybe from some of your own mistakes, perhaps, but like, how did you handle that? Because you did actually in your 20s start to get, more eyeballs on your life.
Yep. So the thing is, when I became a Christian, I felt like my story was so powerful. And it wasn't that my story was more powerful than anyone else, but your own story to you is the most powerful thing in the world. And all you want to do is tell anyone. So I remember saying to Josh, hey, Josh, if you want me to tell my story on Friday night, just let me know. If you want me to get up and do anything. So I was young and I was actually eager for the platform. I remember that feeling. But he decided not to put me there because he could see that I wasn't ready for it. And then it was only till later on in life when a lot of stuff had dropped off me, when I guess doors started opening for the platform. And I guess it was always the platform that I stepped onto it just gradually grew over time. And I think I'm so grateful that for me, the platform grew over time because as the platform was growing, so was my character. And I think it's really important. No, not important, but I think it's very hard now for bigger churches like, Hillsong London, which is a church of over 10,000 people. And to put people on that platform for the very first time is such a huge responsibility. And I think when I've seen it, I've seen the platform being an open door for young people to learn and grow. I think that's amazing. I'm so grateful that it's a church that enables a space for young people to grow. But at the same time, I think we need to also make sure that we're doing the work for the platform, off the platform, which is walking that journey with the ones that are going to go on the platform to make sure that they're going to be able to deal with it. Because otherwise, sometimes the damage that the platform does to us, the limelight, causes so much damage that, number one, not only do we not want to be on the platform again, but we don't want to be part of the church because we've been embarrassed, we've been hurt, almost shamed sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think, if we went by, when I look at some of my earlier leadership experiences and some of the mistakes I made, if we had kind of gone by the book, quote unquote, the book would have said, like, you're out, you're done, you can't work here, you can't do this stuff anymore. But leaders who were willing to come alongside, work with me, help build my character, help refine me. And it's maybe same, when I was young, I had that hunger for some sort of platform. You want to make a name for yourself or whatever it is, but it's so dangerous if it comes without the other stuff. Yeah. And I don't know about you, maybe I'm curious to know what you feel about it now. Do you still have that in you, or I think when I look at like all the stuff going on social media and how everyone is just like shredded, like you say one thing and then like you say you like oranges and everyone's mad at you because you didn't say you liked bananas, It just makes you not want to do it. Maybe that's me getting older, but it just makes you think maybe I don't want this at all. It's not. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the way it was before COVID hit and the cancel culture took place, I think there was an element of glamour attached to being on the platform. Even though we say we're doing it for our right reasons, you get encouragement from lots of people afterwards saying how much it helped them. And, that always is an encouragement when you hear something that, God has put on your heart to show someone else, help someone. That's always going to be a great feeling. But I think now with the current season and situation, it's like the people who are like Paul, the people who will preach, and maybe they will be, appreciated, or maybe they'll be battered and bruised. Paul still went because he knew that was his calling. And I think this season will just, even though you might not want to do it, I think if we feel called to do it, we'll still do it, regardless of the fact that we could get cancelled and we could get, what we say taken the wrong way. It just might be one of the risks of being a preacher in this current season. And who knows where it might be in the future? Like church might have to go fully underground. And, I think, again, could be such a great thing for the church. I'm not saying I want that at all, but like imagine all your KPIs and goals aren't an Instagram photo from the back of the room with everyone full, but it's all underground so no one can see it, but still God's moving and there's lives getting changed and we don't get the glory for it, we don't get the credit, but we're doing it because we know we're called to it.
Yeah. So, it makes me have to ask, like, where are you seeing God moving? I know your viewpoint is from the UK. We over here in Canada, Commonwealth people, Australia, UK, Canada, we have the Queen on our money. But what are you seeing going on? Particularly you work with youth, and I want to get there in the conversation for sure and talk about Gen Z or Gen Z, Alpha, all that kind of stuff. But, post-COVID, the church has gone through such a radical shift and restructuring of some kind. What are you seeing? What's happening in the UK on the ground where you are?
Yeah, well, I think church leaders and youth leaders have done such an incredible job over this last season. I don't think anyone signed up for the roller coaster road that it has been. And so my heart breaks for them. And I always want to just encourage them so much for what they do. But I think what we're seeing is, this move from like attractional services, where you come, you sit, you listen, you take your notepad out, you write the 3 points from the preacher or the pastor, and then you go home, to move away from like the attractional services to more of a personal community. So it's more about connect groups. It's more about small groups, crews, and definitely, in youth ministries, the youth pastors I'm chatting to, which had really good connect groups, are the ones which have really thrived through this season and even grown. And I'd say grown spiritually. Their young people have grown spiritually because they had that connection. And I think young people are really keen, especially just to listen. The young people people are really keen to speak what's on their heart in an environment where other people will listen. And so connect groups, again, small groups are places where there's discussion, where you can deep dive on certain things. And I think that again is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it is encouraging. I think it's easy. It's always the classic thing. The older you get, the begrudging of younger people. Oh, young people today, the church is, falling apart. But there is this exciting, maybe a remnant in some ways, like this exciting new generation coming up who have a fresh look on things. Yeah. So you've more recently, I don't know the exact timing of this, but more recently in your life, you made like a career change. I mean, or maybe that's not the way to say it, but you've shifted the focus of your work to Alpha. So, I mean, you probably could have done lots of things in this next season of life, but why Alpha? What's exciting you about that?
Yeah. My last 3 years at Hillsong London, I was the creative director, and it was such an honor to do that, working with creatives and artists. But ever since I got saved, age 18, I knew my life, I just wanted to give to helping young people encounter Christ. And so after doing a decade at Hillsong London, I just felt it was time to take that step out and step back into youth ministry. And I didn't care what it was going to look like, even if it was like frontline youth work, helping young people on the local council estate. But this position just, I guess, crossed my path, and I looked at the job description, and it was like my dream job, helping create the next video series so young people can ask questions about faith, to encourage and support youth pastors and leaders across the globe. So I wake up every day so grateful and thankful for this role. And I think it's important, for me, just to observe. And that's what I try and do. Like, I don't ever want to be like a church critic, or I don't want to be like a church, just looking at like what's going wrong. I want to be a church encourager, and Alpha is there to serve the church. Everything we do is free, and it's for the church. And so I feel like my season right now is about listening, learning, observing, so that we can create some great stuff, which is going to serve the church.
Yeah, I love that. I saw you post recently about something that you were doing with, you were filming something, and you said, "What's the best thing about listening to Gen Z?" It's listening to Gen Z. That you are in this soaking. It sounds like you're just in this soaking in, sponge it up, trying to hear what they're actually saying.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
It's hard though, because we did that, and when you listen without shutting them down, they've all got very different views to what I have in my head. And so part of creating that safe space is listening to them and allowing them just to voice their opinion. And if they ask me, what's my thoughts, then that's my opportunity to share maybe my thoughts. But until they ask me, I'm just listening to them and creating that safe space, building trust, building relationship. And, I love this generation. They're called the snowflake generation. Because they're flaky, easily offended, got a sense of entitlement. But when you see snowflakes fall together, millions of them, in England here, they shut roads and shops. And that's what we're seeing with this generation. They're making change, not just micro change, but macro change. You get a few more million snowflakes falling at the same time, you get what's called an avalanche. And I think over this last season, we've seen Gen Z cause this avalanche, which is destructing quite a lot of things. Some things need to be destructed. Some things didn't need to be destructed. But I think what is happening through Gen Z, I think God is using it. I think it's our job as the church and as leaders is to kind of go in the avalanche and rescue what needs to be rescued. And I think that's why we need the Holy Spirit discernment to see, what is God saying that can stay buried, that is from the past, I'm not using that anymore. And then what is God saying, hey, that thing's buried and it shouldn't be buried, I'm still using that. So send in a rescue team right now, because no Gen Z is responsible for the avalanche. That's the thing. You never have one snowflake responsible. It's just something that happened together. And now Gen Z are almost getting caught up in their own avalanche with the shame culture and cancel culture. So we're almost jumping in to save the Gen Z, which almost started it. But I think God is going to use it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, can you get, I know before we hit record, you were saying that there's research that you're doing that is going to come out in 2022. You're not there with it yet. So I'm not looking for I'm not trying to quote you for scientific facts, but just generally these trends that you're seeing, like you're naming the avalanche, like what, if you could point out some of the snowballs, I don't know, whatever the metaphor is, if you could point out some of it, what are some of those big things that you're seeing, or the trends?
Yeah, for sure. And some of the research that's coming out is between Barna, World Vision, Biblica, and Alpha, and a load of other great organizations. And so some of the stuff is, around young people are saying that, when it comes to the church, it's kind of like a judgmental place, and they don't want to go and be in this place where judgmental. So they're looking for a judgment-free, safe space that they can be in to share their thoughts and opinions. When it comes to evangelism, they want to do first before say first. They want to demonstrate the gospel before describing the gospel. And so, for us, we would say, but you always got to tell people that, you're a Christian, or tell them about the gospel. And they want to, but they just rather show people first. And I guess that's come from, seasons of everyone saying, this is what you should do and this is how you should behave. They just are like, I don't want to say anything else. I just want to show the love of God, which I think is important, because especially with cancel culture, and Gen Z are canceling people and millennials, but what they're doing, they're becoming very legalistic, and they're saying what you're doing isn't right. And so they're shaming them and naming them. But we know, that's not the way Jesus would ever operate. But we do know that justice, there should be justice. We know we care about the rejected and the marginalized and the hurt. So, what we're seeing is there's a Gen Z who loves Jesus. They really want to demonstrate the love of Jesus. And so they're going to act to see justice, but not by canceling people and judging people, but by demonstrating the love of Jesus Christ through personal relationship and action. So I am quite excited when I started to hear some of these findings, because I think there is definitely hope for them.
Yeah, well, I think I read something in these Barna studies about the generation would say it's wrong to share your faith with someone to try and convert them. But also talking about your faith is important to them. So it's almost like it's not, they want to talk, or they want to demonstrate it and talk about it and have the discussion, but maybe it's that they don't want the sales pitch at the end.
Exactly. No, you're bang on. That's exactly. As soon as it feels forced, as soon as it feels like you're trying to convert someone, then it's like red flags up. But if it's natural relationship and there's engagement there, and someone sees something in their life that causes this moment to pray for one another and to talk with each other, and already what we're seeing with young people is a lot of the gospel helps people. So fear, worry, anxiety, all of these kind of things which Jesus spoke about. They're finding that as Christians, when you just demonstrate how you can overcome these things, that is so attractive to non-Christians, because they don't know, they're dealing with the issue, but they don't know how to solve it. When they see Christians, by the power of the Holy Spirit, just being able to overcome these things, it's not just attractive to them. It's like they need it. They want to know how it happens.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you're talking about things around identity and purpose, where it reminds me of Tim Keller. He was being interviewed by Carey Nieuwhof, and I would imagine Tim Keller's super smart. He probably wrote about this or talked about it other places, but he was talking about in our grandparents' generation, it was this turn or burn, you're going to go to hell. It was sort of, you were appealing to people to come to Jesus out of maybe just straight up fear, fear of what would happen after you died. But it was also about the value system was different around you're not a good person, you're a sinner, turn to Jesus. Where now telling someone they're not a good person is very offensive, and it's not a great starting point, where in a previous generation they might have said, you're right, I'm not a good person. You're a sinner might have resonated more. Now that basically Tim Keller's saying, we want to talk about identity, we want to talk about purpose. And that sounds like even your data or what you're discovering as you listen to them, it sounds similar.
And that's, I was just to say, but that's what Gen Z is saying. And we got to listen, and then we've got to spend some time with the Holy Spirit and make decisions, because just because Gen Z is saying that doesn't mean that it's 100% right. You know what I mean? This is the thing with everything shifting over time. it's so easy for us just to be accustomed to the culture, and we listen to Gen Z and we do everything that they want. But my 3-year-old son, like, he wants chocolate all the time, but I'm not going to give him chocolate all the time because I know that's not healthy for him. And so I think it's important for us that we listen, and then we really do, like, spend some time praying and being able to still act out of love. Because I know when I was 18 and I was in Josh Kelsey's office, and he was saying to me, Dan, he just told me that he just found out all this stuff that I'd done. In that moment, he didn't hide it from me. He confronted me. He said, Dan, this is what you did, and this is the effect it has on you, and this is the effect it has on other people, and you need to know that. Now, it's your decision what you do with that, but ultimately, my job as a leader is to tell you, Dan, so that you can make the decision. And at some point, we will need to, when there's relationship, sit down with Gen Z and say, hey, I'm listening to you, but I just want to let you know that if you keep going that way, this is the impact it has on you and others. And just, we've got to be, I think we do have to have those hard conversations at the same time.
Yeah, well, I really hear what you're saying. I appreciate that. It's true because no generation has it right. There's these trends or preferred ways, and then the next generation comes along, critiques it, and says, the fancy word deconstruction or whatever. But what Gen Z is saying that they're seeking in their faith, in a community, in an approach to evangelism, some of that is right on. And some of it is, maybe it's, I don't know exactly what that would be, but it's just simply even just fear-based. Like, why are you afraid to say what how do we help you overcome the fear of talking? It can't all just be show. It has to also be tell. Yeah. So in that, then what are they talking about their faith community? If they were part of a church, do they want to be part of a church? What are you hearing about the kind of community or the kind of multi-generational thing they would want to be a part of? Like, if they were going to hang around with older people, what kind of people are, and maybe some of this is the same for every generation, but if you could help us name, like, what are they looking for in us?
So I think, without, repeating myself, but like just a safe space where they can belong. Belonging is really important. And, where they can come and they can voice their opinions and even ask their questions. And that's the big thing, because we don't always create space for them to ask their questions because we're afraid we won't have the answers. But I think young people are okay with us not having the answers. They just want to journey with us in the discovery of the answers. And so, to create that space where they can ask questions, and if we don't have the answers, just explore it together. I think that's very significant. I think we need to move past them being in the room on a Sunday. Obviously, meeting together, we know the power of community meeting together on a Sunday. But let's just say, like, a young person just decides to give up on a Sunday. That shouldn't mean that they're not part of church. I think that's where the leadership looks like, youth leadership looks like, we go to them. We're calling them before their exam. We're there at their football match, cheering them on. We're taking them for, a milkshake or something after. And we're just talking to them about life. And you'll have so many opportunities for a God chat and a God conversation there, for one-on-one discipleship there. Now, they might not be fitting the seat on a Sunday, but that is still helping them to become more like Christ. And again, the metrics and the numbers aren't as measurable. They're not as attractive, but I think, they're deeply important.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, it's the stuff that has always been important has not gone away in this, the digital world that we're in. So, let's talk about that, because you're talking about showing up at the football game, having a milkshake, being present in their life. The idea of on-demand, everything, we can get things when we want it, the time that we want it. Nobody's showing up on Thursday night at 8:00 to watch a show anymore. And so it's a generation that doesn't even think that way about how they would consume content, let alone, what do you mean I have to show up at only this one time and place to have some sort of spiritual growth or connection for the week? Like, that's just not how they're how really most of us are thinking these days. But of course, we're Made Digital. We're a podcast where we love talking about digital and discipleship. Sometimes those words go together. Sometimes they're enemies of each other. Sometimes it doesn't work. But, it's sort of like the double-edged sword, right? This thing that can bring us all together, but also can cause, major mental health issues, body image, even all the stuff that just recently Facebook had all that stuff come out with, which was their own internal documents saying how much their platforms like Instagram like negatively affect young people's well-being, image of self, etc. So how are you approaching that? Maybe even personally. I mean, are you addicted to your phone? How are you doing with that? But also how are we doing that with, everyone under 25?
Yeah, such a good question. I mean, I think I definitely, have had to deal with it myself in terms of having a day where my phone is just totally switched off. I've got time limits on my social media, and I'm 36 years old. And so if it's something that I have to like discipline myself in, my heart breaks for the generation who have grown up where they haven't known, anything different. I think when it comes to social media, the difference between, I guess, when I was growing up is that the term role model has gone and influencers has appeared. And influencers impact your external. So wear this makeup, wear your hair like this, wear this outfit, go to this place on holiday. That's what an influencer does. It changes your external. But a role model changes your internal, changes your inside. A role model is someone who is in close proximity to you, and you see their life and you see their character and their values. And there's something that inspires you about them. And so you actually want to live the way they live, and you ask them to speak into your life and you want to spend time with them. Growing up, because we didn't have the word influencers, I mean, there was moments where I said David Beckham was my role model. But David Beckham, when I think about it as a teenager, he was just an influencer. He impacted my haircuts, he impacted my tattoos, he impacted my football. But at the end of the day, he just made an external change. He never changed my internal. It was my dad and my stepdad. It was the youth leader who was trying to get me into church through my teenage years, which he never felt like he was succeeding because I wasn't a Christian through my teenage years. Yet still to this day, I remember moments of my life where he encouraged me and supported me. And even when I got suspended from school, I remember calling him up. And so he was a role model to me. And so I think, again, how do we deal with this? I think we use it for all the good that we can, but then we still try and be the best physical role models to the people in our world as we can. And we've got to lead the way on the digital in terms of like, as leaders, if we get caught out being just, I guess, overwhelmed by how much time we spend on it, then what hope is there for, the next generation? And so, we need to actually like think hard about the example that we're setting.
Yeah. Well, it's just the idea that somebody said recently to me that if you're born in the 2000s, you in this century, you have no memory of a time you couldn't see the person you were talking to on the phone.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, and so when you're even just 5 or 10 years older than that, it's hard to imagine that that's your only frame of reference because we've seen both sides. You and I, this millennial, we're sort of, like bridging between these two worlds. And I think maybe in that sense why you, Dan, are positioned, because you can talk up and down. You've seen both sides of it. What I mean, obviously, like that's where you're trying to, talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with Alpha right now. I mean, as you've taken leadership here with youth, I think the challenge of creating youth content is change, like every few years, what's cool or not that we're just chasing cool, but what would connect with people changes in terms of style. How you film something, the kind of music, the kind of clothes people are wearing in the videos. Like, if it's not cool, I'm sure people just like shut it off before they even gave it a chance sometimes. So how are you thinking about content and like digital content? Because when I think of Alpha, I think of a 12-week video series you do now. It used to be always in person. It can now be online through Zoom. But when you're thinking about youth content, how are you wanting to distribute that? Maybe this is stuff you can't say too much about yet, but for what you can say, I'd love to understand how you're approaching digital content for this kind of generation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a great question, and I'm more than happy to talk about it. I think the theology is set in stone. Like, it's such a great format, and so we're not going to change that. But yeah, the way we create it is definitely on the table for discussion. And at the moment, I've been looking at the whole metaverse and this AI VR world that is set. That's just going to continue to become more and more part of our world. With Facebook, they're saying by 2030, all of our Zoom calls will be, with our goggles, and so more interactive. And the teenagers, which will be doing the next alpha series that we bring out, right now they're probably between the ages of 9 and 12 at the moment. And that age group are massively into gaming and animation and animojis. And so we're looking heavily into animation, and we've had meetings with the Bible Project. So, what would that look like to, do it all with animation? Would we lose the personal, or maybe the personal comes at home where the discussion happens, and you can still have the theology all animated? Maybe in the future, Alpha might have animation studios across the globe, with contextualization, with the right skin colors, with the right accents, and no more subbing and dubbing, but everything local. Because for us, we want it to be personal to every single teenager in India, in China, and I think animation and the digital world is actually going to create a great opportunity for that. So we're doing a lot of listening and learning research right now, but my hunch is that we probably will go down the animation route for sure.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I didn't think that would be what you would say. Okay, I'm curious. I'll stay tuned. I tried, this is again, me being a 35-year-old old lady now, I tried virtual reality goggles, an experience for the first time. A friend of mine who's a YouTuber has all this stuff sent to him, all these toys. And it was way better than I expected it to be in terms of an experience. And I've been hearing people are even going to VR church, you're in the virtual lobby, and a guy beside you will say oh, hey, what time is the thing at? Oh, I think it's over here. You can have a whole chat with someone you don't even know, then go into this virtual room. It's amazing. It's a good Christmas present if people are trying to figure out what to buy people for an expensive and fun toy. But can we talk even specifically drill down to length of content? Because there's been sort of a traditional long form. Do you think length matters? Length of content you're producing. Are you trying to make things as short as would you rather have 50 clips that are 1 minute long, or are you trying to, can people do long form content still? What do you think about that?
Yeah, 100%. It's such a great question again. One of the feedback that we did get back was a lot of young people are wanting to run Alpha in their schools, and even their lunch breaks aren't long enough to run the current series. So you have to do an express schools version, 10 minutes, maybe with bolt-on stories. Maybe some of the stories you can send the night before to someone to watch. And so we're looking to do loads of different options, but with everyone's attention span constantly getting shorter and shorter, we're really looking at all of that. But at the same time, Disney puts out The Mandalorian, and that goes for 45 minutes, and teenagers are hooked. So long format isn't going away. I guess it just depends what do you want to do? And for Alpha, the content is important, but the discussion is equally important. And if it means breaking down different ways to access the content so that you can still keep the authenticity in the discussion, then we want to do that.
Yeah. I'm curious when, I'm on the board of an organization that talked about a Christian organization, and they said they want to be a leader in technology. And, my bounce back and forth in the conversation in the meeting about that was, what do you mean by leader? Because, we will never compete with a multi-billion or trillion-dollar Google, Apple, whatever, the largest companies in the world that have access to, far more money to create, you say, you're talking about the Mandalorian or Disney, they have deep pockets in order to create content that people want to sit and watch for 45 minutes. So do you feel that pressure? I'm curious too, because I know you come from that creative background in church. I come from that background as well. Limited time, limited budgets, big dreams. How do you navigate that? You want quality, but I guess what are the I don't know, what are the markers of it being kind of excellent to you when you don't have the Disney budget?
Yeah. I mean, cost is everything. When it comes to animation, like, it will be way more expensive than doing it another way. The question is like, you know, if the vision is there, I will pitch that vision to millionaires around the world, and if they believe the vision is worth it, then they will sow into it, and if the vision's not worth it, then they won't. And I think that's a good telltale for me. But you know, I love your friend who said he wants to be a leader, because maybe he won't be a leader compared to Apple or Facebook, but maybe he'll be a leader for the church, you know, big C, globally. And I think we do need churches who feel like they are called to this, who are going to really like take giant steps to work out, you know, what, when it comes to technology, is going to serve the church. Because, you know, not everything is going to be helpful for the church, and we all kind of work out all these different things ourselves. But it'd be great if there was some like churches who are really saying, look, we've done the research, try this, try that. And for some churches, like, they don't need to have all the technology, like just in person, acoustic guitar, you know, they don't need it. But like for other churches, they might need it. And so I would really encourage some of those churches who feel called to that to step out and pioneer and to take risks. You know, and to kind of like fail for us, so that the church can kind of learn, you know, where technology can serve the church.
I love that. You're right, because there are some amongst us who actually maybe have the gift to fail, as in they have the consequences for them are different than the consequences for the small local church who can't afford to be the test lab for all of this stuff. That there are some amongst us who have the gift of the gift of trial and error. I love that. You know, you do have a lot of people listening to this podcast are probably, you know, in the 25 to 45 range, but there are some younger people who are listening. So, you know, I appreciate what you were saying earlier about, you know, we're the best thing about listening to Gen Z is that we get to listen to Gen Z. But there are also, you know, blind spots we all have. You know, if you could name one thing as an encouragement for a younger person listening to you, you know, who's a young leader, a young Christian trying to think about faith, is there something that you would just offer to them as an encouragement, or maybe something to, you know, do you want to tell them to go into the woods and be silent for a while? Do you want to tell them, you know, to go get a mentor or get off their phone? I don't know what it is, but, you know, what would be something that you would encourage young people as like a practical action in their faith?
Yeah, and I'll probably sound so old school, but it is literally just spending time in your Bible. And the thing is like, especially with Gen Z, you know, a lot of them are like visual learners, audible learners, podcasts and videos. YouTube has gone through the roof. Reading with Gen Z, you know, maybe not so much because there's so much out there visual. So I would encourage them to like look at your Bible reading, but like be okay with looking at technology for your Bible. So like there's obviously YouVersion, but there's also Glorify, and there's all these new ways. There's the Youth Bible 1 Year, which we've just created. There's all these new ways to access the gospel, access the Bible, but like listen to Audible. Some of them have like, you know, really nice soundtracks throughout, giving you a sense of peace to help your mental health. And there's just so much out there. So I would just encourage you, you know, in the same way, you know, you're diving on YouTube, just kind of try and discipline, you know, 10 minutes a day to go, you know, use the digital for God's word, and just allow him just to speak to your life through that, you know, day in and day out, because there's so much great stuff out there to help young people.
Yeah, I love that. It doesn't sound old school. It just sounds like the same thing has always been true. Like much has changed about the world, and like Jesus is as relevant as ever. To meet our needs. He is sufficient for what we need. So where are you, you know, maybe as a last question, you know, where are you hopeful for this generation? What are you excited to see as they grow older into adulthood and begin maybe moving into more leadership positions themselves 5-10 years from now? Already some are. What are you hopeful for? What are you excited about? When you think of like 10 years from now, what are you so excited about in the church because of young people who are being raised up?
I mean, I think this generation is ready to step up into leadership as long as we walk with them. Greta Thunberg, she's talking to the world leaders about climate change, and she's like 16 years old. And I think there is passionate Christian 16-year-olds around in our church, and we need to find them, empower them, and walk with them, and allow them to use their voice to bring around change. And I'm excited that if we start giving them opportunity to do that within the church and ask them, what is on your heart, not just like this is what we're already doing, but what is God saying to you? How can we, get behind what God's saying to you? This Gen Z, they're going to become the role models for the next generation, which is Generation Alpha. And they're everybody under 10 years old. And so this generation is like my son, who walks into a room and talks to Siri and says, "Hey Siri, play Moana." Like it's a generation, which is just immersed in the digital. And it's a generation which are getting parented by the millennials. And so I think with getting parented by millennials, you got role models as Gen Z. I think Generation Alpha, literally, you will just continue to build on. If millennials said they wanted change, Gen Z started bringing around the change. I think Gen Alpha will continue to see that change happen. And so I think Gen Z are going to be great role models.
Dan, if people want to find you or the work you're doing, where do you want to send people to find more of all the stuff you've been talking about?
Yeah. We're working on bringing out a few little things like podcasts and stuff like that. But I guess at the moment, I always post about Alpha and stuff like that on my Instagram, which is just Dan Blythe 8. So yeah, it'd be great to connect with people through that. Awesome.
Thanks so much, Dan. I hope that people listening are listening to what you're saying and be inspired to actually invest in people who are worth investing in, that we would make disciples, and that the beauty is we get to learn from them as they learn from us. So thanks so much, Dan, for your investing. I'm so pumped that you're at Alpha, and can't wait to see what you create next.
Thanks, John. I love what you're creating. Love your podcast. Appreciate it.